in a moment, we'll take a look at King's Speech and Bedford Reader, and we'll talk about soapstone and all that kind of stuff. Just to make sure, though, before then, we're all on the same page. Tomorrow, you're coming in with your paper copy of your rough draft for Grapes of Wrath. Normally, we don't do paper copies, but since we're doing peer editing for this prompt, as well as the next one that we'll talk about, for those, you'll bring in paper copies. So if the printer's not working, you run out of paper, toner, ink, all that kind of stuff, see me, homeroom, I'll write you fast, we'll go down to the library and print it out. If you haven't started writing yet, I'd start. Remember Heart of Darkness, chapters 1 and 2, that starts on page 65, runs to page 128. That's what you're reading for Tuesday of next week. So when you come into class, you'll have that read. By Monday night, you do the Imperialism Notes video. Allie did the video. She got them all right. So if she can do it, you can do it.
Yeah. Woo. Teamwork.
Took what, like half an hour?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, when you do that, it's entirely up to you. But just kind of like some background stuff to go along with what context is going to be for Heart of Darkness. I think a lot of it you'll already kind of know, or at least recall once we bring it up, from world history stuff that you would have been doing last year, regardless of what level of history you were taking. With King's Speech that we're going to look at, we're going to start with the soapstone, then we're going to look at diddles, and then the plan is to do a spa. You're not writing an essay for the speech, but again, going through the process, the thought process, and the actual physical process of what you would do to kind of prepare for a rhetorical analysis essay. Since that's what you're doing with Grapes of Wrath right now, that's what we're going to be doing with prompt number 2 for the Grapes of Wrath. That's what you're going to be doing with Heart of Darkness. Practice, 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 practice. Does not make perfect, Sean. Practice makes better.
Do we need to be bringing Grapes of Wrath with us every day?
Today, no. Tomorrow, for the most part, probably not. The only reason would be like tomorrow, and actually we'll kind of throw out, does anyone have any essay questions before we get into tomorrow? I guess there could be a thing tomorrow where we're going to, what do you mean by that, or what's the context? It would be nice to kind of have the book to flip into. Friday, we will talk about prompt number 2. So there could be some things with Friday where we get into the book. Next week, though, is pretty much going to be Heart of Darkness stuff. So when that's going on, don't worry about that book, but have other one instead. Bedford Reader, we will use probably next Thursday, because there'll be another article in there that will kind of tie in. Before we get into King's Speech, are there any other like rough draft essay questions, stuff like that for tomorrow? Make sure you do your works cited page. That's going to be something silly that you lose points for. Everyone would have the Grapes of Wrath, and then any Google sites that Sean found that he uses and incorporates into his essay, he'll cite those as well.
Is it work cited or work cited if you only have one?
You only have one, it's technically a work cited.
Okay.
I think I have works written in the thing, and I'm not going to take like a point off, for your rough draft, but if it is only one, it would be a work cited, no S.
As long as all your quotes end up evening out to 5 to 4, 4 to 5, is it okay if all of them for like one paragraph come from the same type of chapter, the expository or narrative?
So you're not saying necessarily the same chapter, but like I have 2 or 3 different expository chapters for that one part?
Yeah, like if one of my paragraphs had only support from expository chapter.
Yeah, that could be okay.
Okay.
And that's where, like, if we do have a main concern, we'll be able to address that. The nice thing about you folks being in 7th period, you are by far the smallest class that I have. You're going to break off into groups. I'm going to come around group to group, kind of go over some things, mark off that you have it. Have a better chance of actually having some worthwhile conversation as opposed to like 9th period when there's 24 of them. It's going to be pretty quick. So if there is an issue, number one, if there's an issue, a concern that you have going in, have a mental note so that we can bring it up. And then if there's anything that I see, I can certainly let you know about it as well. It's the first essay. There's going to be some speed bumps along with it. It's purposely why we're doing a couple drafts before you do some final copies. Where some folks will kind of get themselves into trouble, I think, is somewhere along the way we decided long essays are really good essays. It's not always the case. I'm not saying write a 2-page essay or anything like that. Most of the good ones are probably going to be in that 3.5 to 4 kind of range. but don't worry about having really long passages, quotes, you know, where you do that block quote and it takes up half the page, because all you're doing at that point is you're rewriting the book. I know what Steinbeck wrote, Allie knows what Steinbeck wrote, Emma knows what Steinbeck wrote, I'm worried about what you wrote about what he wrote. So the lengthy quotes we don't necessarily need. Now sometimes they are necessary, and sometimes they are appropriate, but most of the time, I bet as the year goes on, your quoted passages, while the number will stay, they'll probably get a little bit shorter, a little bit smaller as it goes.
Are we supposed to be typing our essay in like the MLA format thing?
That thing. You don't have to. So if you have already started typing it, not using the thing on Google Classroom, that's fine.
Okay, because I tried and it like wasn't letting me. I was saying that I only had access to view it.
We'll have to look at it at some point for you. I think like once you open it, thanks. There's like a little button at the top will say they can open it into
Yeah, it's a safe
into
drive.
Doc. We'll check it out. If you, as long as you have a paper copy for tomorrow, that's all I'm worried about. Okay. No question, just fist bump.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. If you are using diction, nothing wrong with it. Individual words, though, are what you're looking at, and you got to make sure that you explain why that individual word is important to the overall argument. You don't have to explain what diction is or what metaphor is or parallel structure, but you do have to explain why that example reinforces the argument that you have selected. Sometimes I think people kind of rely on the, oh, he'll know what I mean kind of thought process, but I need you to kind of spell it out as to what mentally, why are you putting these things together? Explain that for me. That's the big part of the body paragraphs. All right, so for King, do a soapstone. Again, whole idea of this is just to give us a better sense as to where is he coming from with his arguments. What's our first S stand for? Not subject, that's the second one. First one's speaker, but we're going to avoid writing Martin Luther King Jr. because we want more characteristics, traits, background information that would be useful. So without saying Martin Luther King, what would be things that we could put about Martin Luther King?
He's African American.
Okay, African American.
He's a pastor.
He's a minister. Sean, you said 1960s?
Yeah.
I'm going to slide that down here into occasion,
Okay.
because that's kind of like the era that we're taking a look at, Lizzie. Okay, so he is like and at this point, he's certainly well known. He is a civil rights activist leader. It's not as if this is the first time that he gets introduced to the mainstream world. So renowned, in fact, that he is winner of Nobel Peace Prize. Anything else? And again, he's a historical figure that we're familiar with, but it means more to say who's the speaker. Well, it's an African American minister who's a civil rights leader, well-known Nobel Peace Prize winner, as opposed to just listing a proper name, Martin Luther King Jr. Occasion, 1960s. And for occasion, you can go certainly like decades. Certain decades you kind of associate eras with. You know, there's the Progressive era, there's the Renaissance, not recently, but you know, in the past, industrialization or Industrial Revolution. You can go with exact dates, exact locations. So what would be like some occasion stuff that we could put in beyond simply just saying 1960s?
A rally in downtown DC.
Okay, so we're in Washington, D.C. Change color. Do we know specifically, like, where in D.C.?
Was Lincoln.
So he's in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Grace and Noel are like, we already talked about this.
100 years before the Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation.
Okay, what was the first part you said?
100 100 years before that. This speech.
Okay, so this is 100 years after Emancipation Proclamation on August 28th, so we missed it by 2 days, but 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, which was signed into act by Lincoln, so it's kind of fitting that he would be standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial. From an era standpoint, we could also say it's during the Civil Rights Movement, certainly a known period where you do have a lot of advocacy for equal rights, opportunity, things like that. What do you think about audience? Please don't say America. Who would put audience? Who knew this would be a struggle?
I mean, there's the immediate audience. He was speaking at a rally, so he was speaking with fellow civil rights activists.
And presumably the majority from a race standpoint are black. However, he does make a point in mentioning in his speech that there are black and white. Why speak in DC? From an audience standpoint, probably also want to make yourself known to the U.S. government. Who is in charge of making sure that, all the things that Lincoln was doing before is being carried out appropriately and in a timely manner. He doesn't think that's the case 100 years later. Anybody else? Were any of you there?
Yes.
We'll get into reincarnation later. That'll be a January topic. And it will be. But you weren't there, but you've seen it, or at least clips. Because go to YouTube, it's there. I said avoid, saying America, but it was delivered mainstream media audience, so it certainly would be going to other supporters, and it would certainly go to others who would be against them. So it really is sent out to the population, whether it would be in favor or against. It would certainly be sent out to people in the South. It would certainly be sent out to people in the North. It would be sent to people in the East and the West. So supporters and also those who would be going against them. Purpose, I'm going to hold off here on a little bit. I can say that one for last. Subject, usually pretty straightforward. What is the subject? What's he speaking about? Say civil rights or Kobe?
It's basically that once all this is over, he wants men and women of all colors to just come together
Okay.
and be happy.
So he wants to basically, he's speaking about a divided nation. Now, you said, I think you said he wants people to come together?
Yeah.
All right. So, not saying that if this were, again, a theoretical essay, because we're not writing one about the book, you got enough, or about the speech, you have enough that's going on. If you were taking a look at this as being your subject, what would be an appropriate purpose? What is he trying to do to a divided nation? Bring them together. So what's a nice little one word when you bring together? Reconnect, unify, unite. Yeah. I wrote unite, I guess. If it's a divide, and this would also kind of go along with uniting, but a little bit different. A divided nation, there's usually wounds that have occurred. So what do you try to do to a wounded country? Heal. What would be other purposes? And you don't have to think of divided nation. You can think of civil rights or other stuff.
Maybe thinking along the lines of wound, protect.
Protect. Sure. Sean, did you? Teach, educate. People will say like inspire. You could, or persuade. You could try to inspire people to, from a subject, maybe change viewpoints. Or you could actually, what could you do with the word change? You could move that up into your purpose. What's his purpose? He's trying to change the mindset of the nation. But regardless of which one you want to choose, unite, heal, protect, teach, inspire, change, my claim would be all of those are infinitely better than the word show. It means more to say heal than to show. It means more to protect, unite, to change than it does simply to say show. How about tone?
Hopeful.
Hopeful, optimistic. And then we get like an answer that are 5 synonyms of that term. What else? And he certainly is hopeful.
Moved.
What do you mean by moved?
Like inspired. Like he is inspired too.
Okay. Yeah. Or like relentless with it. You know, he is a pacifist, you know, non-violent, but we're going to keep working at this. Grace, you said the 100 years before was Emancipation Proclamation. Since it's 100 years later and he's still determined to like change some things, what's another word that we could use? I mean, if it's taken this long, especially at the beginning of the speech, he's pretty, he's upset. He's angry. Now, it doesn't mean he's taking a militant tone with it. You know, he's certainly taking a different approach, but he is letting you know that he is not happy with what's going on. But why are we doing this again with the whole soapstone thing? As you try to figure out, okay, what is the argument? What are the devices that I want to support? I think it is a lot more helpful knowing, all right, if I like this determined, he is determined to unite a wounded nation, then I want to find rhetorical devices that are going to help prove that point rather than blindly looking for examples of imagery, diction, details, figurative language, syntax. Not that you have to decide which ones you're going with, but it certainly puts you in a better position, a better viewpoint of what is he trying to accomplish? Do these devices, these examples that I find, accomplish that point? And you consider this for, you know, Grapes of Wrath essay, and again, not that you're going to be making wholesale changes to a rough draft, but going into a final copy, do the examples that I have really fit in with what my argument is that I'm trying to convey with Steinbeck? So doing a soapstone, I think, puts you in the right frame of mind before you start locating and trying to identify what your diddles will be. What are some diddles? And we can go in any order. We don't have to start at the top with diction. Probably a good idea to open up the book at this point. 625 is where it starts. So that we can kind of point to specific, rather than going, he uses imagery somewhere, you know, what do you see? Yeah. That was a rhetorical question. I don't know. You said may, I think.
I don't know if this would be a form of diction, but he says years a lot, so maybe that could be like him expressing irritation at five score years ago. Like,
well, let's start right there with that line, 5 score years ago. What's he doing? Why say, number one, what does he mean by 5 score?
100 years.
Means 100. It's math. 5 times 20 equals 100. Why use the word score? Kobe, since you brought it up.
4 score and 7 years ago. That's when he's trying to emanate from the Gettysburg Address as well as the
He's mimicking Abraham Lincoln. Grace, what could we call that? He's making an illusion. So number one, boom, illusion becomes an option. He does it right off the bat. And him even mentioning Emancipation Proclamation. There's a question, first period, illusion. Does it have to be like a subtle thing, or can it be pretty obvious? 5 score a year ago is an illusion. It's an indirect illusion. You know, you have to know Gettysburg Address for it to work. It's a well enough known document that, you know, people understand it. Plus, who's right there? Lincoln
Well, I thought you
Memorial.
were talking about in this actual class. And I was
Well,
like,
then you missed the point.
I don't know.
Lincoln is right there. Shakespeare's right there. Lincoln, Shakespeare, Lincoln, Shakespeare. Lincoln is right there. So it even works a little bit more, you know, through that. That's called, well, it's rhetorical appeal. CHS argumentation, what a joke. What is it? What, the fact that he's standing in front of Lincoln Memorial using the setting as part of the impact of his appeal, Kairos. You're using that setting as a way to kind of get it across. So that's an illusion. On 626, I think it's paragraph 4, paragraph 3, Declaration of Independence, Constitution, that's illusion as well. You're directly stating it. So I think a lot of times we look for the indirect ones, but it could be direct statement can still be an illusion. So there are a lot of illusions that are taking place, and I would say with his illusions, they tend to fall into two categories. One category is patriotic. Other category, and considering what we put as like the first thing for the soapstone also makes sense. He makes a lot of what other kind of illusions? Yeah, like religious illusions. You know, make references to God. Why would you make references to God? Divided nation. Both sides, though, generally pray to the same God with the situation that's taking place. So he'll also do some religious illusions throughout. It makes sense then for him to do that since that's who he is. So Kobe, your original thing was, I don't know if it's diction or what I want to call it necessarily. Here, I would go illusion. Now, he then does the 100 years later, the use of now, even I have a dream, let freedom ring. What does he do with those terms? He keeps repeating them. So you're not necessarily looking at the fact that he uses those words, but you're looking at the fact that he uses those words or phrases repeatedly. Since I'm looking at the fact that they are getting repeated, I'm now going to put that one in my syntax category, and I'm going to, what would you call it? You could call it repetition. So 100 years, now, you know, I have a dream. You could call it repetition. What else could you call it? Besides syntax. Could call it syntax.
Parallelism.
Could call it parallelism, parallel structure. If Kobe calls it repetition, Byron calls it parallelism, neither one's wrong. It is what's happening. There's even a third option. Begins with an A. We call it anaphora. Anaphora is when you repeat the same word or phrase at the beginning of successive clauses or sentences. All three are correct. Anaphora is probably the more exact one, but that doesn't mean that you're put yourself in a bad spot by calling it repetition. It's the explanation that's important. You could call it anaphora and completely butcher the explanation, the analysis, at which point you haven't done anything to really help yourself. So, you know, there are certainly some different categories that things can fall into. What else? Just in general.
You could use diction for how much he says the word Negro.
Okay, why we going to put emphasis on? I'm not arguing, but always going to ask why.
Basically, because like back then, that's what they were called, and like sometimes they could be, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but like derogatory. Like if a white man were to say that to a black man, that could be considered like mean.
Okay.
And so like he's using that to say that like, just because we have different skin, and like they're known as that, So he's using that word repeatedly just to show that the rights are different.
I know where you're going. I think you're going to have a hard time explaining that in written word, to be honest. Like, it's probably going to be a circular argument where, and a circular argument just basically means you repeat itself. Mr. Kane is a bad teacher because he cannot teach well.
Okay.
You're saying I can't teach because I can't teach.
Just false.
Everyone believes in Santa Claus because Santa Claus is universally believed in. That's begging the question. So you want to make sure you don't run into the issue of he uses the term Negro to identify black citizens as Negroes, as opposed to something else. Now he certainly will call attention to there's a lot of similarities between whites and blacks, and he does a lot of things. And Byron said parallelism when we were talking about that kind of repetition. But he'll make very last paragraph 27. When we let freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we'll be able to speed up to that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, you got parallel structure with all of those groups, will be able to join hands and sing the words of an old ancient Negro, or an old Negro spiritual. Free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. In that one paragraph, you got parallel structure. You could argue you have juxtaposition where he's taking groups of people that folks don't always think of as getting along, Jews, Gentiles, Catholics, Protestants, whites, blacks. He's making allusion. He's doing patriotic references. He's fitting a lot of things all in that one paragraph. So I'd say that's like the main argument of kind of bringing together. You probably want to go a little bit beyond just that use of the word Negro.
Okay.
But that would be a good example where, hey, parallel structure, look, white and black, people of all different types can come together. I think when it comes to diction, and going along with that idea that you have, Sean, that at the top of 627, I think it's paragraph 6, Paragraph 6 starts on 626, goes to 627. I would say there is a word that he uses in that paragraph that would reinforce the idea of all people coming together. And it's not a, wow, that's an awesome word. It's not language enrichment, vocab list 12. Paragraph 6, but on the 627 side.
Destiny.
It's a good word, not the one I was thinking of. Not the one I was thinking of. Not the one I was thinking of. All good words, though. Who's there? Blacks as well as our white brothers. Oops. Highlighter does not look good. Go ahead. Okay. Why does that word have such an impact to it?
Because it shows that not only do black people want it, but white people want it as well.
Okay, so this isn't just where, hey, you're on one side or you're on the other. We know that there are black people here. We also know that there are white people here. Now, he could have, and no one would have a problem with the speech. It would still be showing up in this anthology. It would still be hailed as one of the greatest 20th century speeches of U.S. history or even world history. And we'd probably still be doing a soapstone, diddles, and spa for it if he had wrote friends, or white community members, or white citizens. But what does that word imply?
Love.
Yeah, like love, family. Someone said community is one of the words, but family is very different, especially in this era when the idea of an interracial marriage would be completely taboo. To have white and black like with a family term, that's out of the question for some people. But that really illustrates what he sees as could be happening. White brothers were part of the same family, were part of the same community. So what happens is, again, notice, you're focusing on the use of an individual word and the impact that it has with it. Byron, did you have something? Now, I would have to call it some kind of diction, loving diction, family diction, unifying diction. There's a lot of different adjectives that you could use. Maybe I'll go unifying. What else? Noel?
So you want an imagery when he gets into the I have a drinking part of speech.
Mm-hmm.
When he's describing vehicles in Georgia and like people leaking hands and sitting down at the same table.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of like geographical imagery, and then you're right, like sitting down at the same table, they're no longer gonna have to drink from like the cup of bitterness and all of that kind of stuff. Sitting at the same table, not geographical imagery, but another example. The geographical imagery, what part of the country does he highlight? South, but I'd also say everything, whether you're Sierra Mountains, Appalachian Mountain, Allegheny Mountains, Smoky Top Mountains, all those kinds of things, which when you think about segregation and civil rights, I think we do think of it as being whose problem? Or certainly did, still do, I think to some degree. It's a Southern issue. But by him mentioning the whole nation, if there's any chance of this problem being rectified, everyone has to be involved. Byron, you had another?
Yeah, I think we already mentioned 100 years, but that could be in detail.
Sure. And again, details don't have to be just numbers, but you're going back to that detail of the Emancipation Proclamation, which, quite all honesty, some people might have forgotten about. Paragraph 3. Yes. You start to do in paragraph 3, and does it before, and continues throughout. Came to the capital, cash check, got a promissory note, been defaulted, you got the Bank of Justice, put all these things together. You got not just a metaphor, you got an extended metaphor because he's building on it over and over and over again. A lot of bank stuff going on for a couple of weeks of school. Bank of Justice. Anything else? There is more, but for this one we could keep just going on and on. You take a look at the bottom of 625 going into 626, 100 years later, we mentioned that. The life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. You got personification and metaphor going on. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. More metaphor, imagery. Makes reference to slums, ghettos. That certainly can have a lot of imagery. And also, when you're dealing with speaking, there tends to be a lot of auditory stuff taking place. And that's where repetition, parallel structure, anaphora can come in because it's a point of emphasis. Keep in mind the crowd's not reading the speech with him, they are listening to it. So when you are looking at speeches, I think syntax plays a more critical role than it might in a traditional short story or a novel. One thing to also kind of keep an eye out for, because he does it quite a lot, is alliteration. And what does the alliteration do? It ends up being a point of emphasis. So when there are critical concepts, alliteration, that he wants to emphasize and make a point, he'll tend to alliterate them. I don't know if that's a verb, but I just made it one. It works. So we have our diddles. Now, the assignment is, all right, what's our essay going to be? What's our thesis statement? Well, this is when we would then go to that good old spa. Remember, Sean doesn't like intro paragraphs. Doesn't seem like many of you did. Worst case scenario, write the thesis statement, go write the essay, then go back and explain what you did in the intro. But what would, and you want to work backwards, so you're going argument, purpose, and then the strategies. What would be that purpose, verb, and argument that you want to write about?
Did I miss my bell?
Who knows? Yeah, I guess so.
Okay.
Have fun in music theory. This is confusing. She leaves early. Don't you wish you left early? I wish I left early, but then there'd be no one here. What's our purpose argument? Or what could be a purpose? I'm not saying it has to be ours. Unite what?
Oh, unite the nation.
Who's the nation?
Unite America.
That's not really any better.
Unite Americans. American.
Unite a divided
Nation. Unite a divided nation.
nation. What are the strategies that it uses to unite a divided nation? And again, we're coming up with 3 that we would want to use at this point. Toby, give me one.
Illusion.
Illusion. Parallel structure. And what else just before I go? What? Extended metaphor? Unite a divided nation. I put an extra period in there. Notice I did not use king unites a divided nation, because if you were writing a response to this, you are analyzing the rhetoric that he uses, the language that he uses. My first paragraph is going to be about illusion. My second will be parallel structure. My third would be extended metaphor. If you wanted to use diction, no problem with that whatsoever. An adjective that I would stay away from for diction, based on my thesis, would be unifying, because it's going to sound repetitive. Unifying diction unites a divided nation. I don't have to mention Martin Luther King in my thesis, because he's already going to get introduced within my introduction. I know I'm looking at I Have a Dream. I am placing the emphasis on the devices that he is using. But clearly you can then see that, all right, these things exist, and the big ticket item in the body paragraphs explain how those devices do this. A complaint that people have, or a concern, is I feel like I sound so repetitive because I keep using that verb over and over again. No kidding, because that's what you said you were going to do for those 3 body paragraphs. So yes, it's good to vary your words and whatnot, but whatever that purpose and whatever that argument is that you pick for any rhetorical analysis essay, Grapes of Wrath, or stuff later on in the year, you're going to reiterate those points again and again and again. Just make sure you explain how the device helps to accomplish those things. Any questions? Okay. I guess we have bells now, so we'll wait and see if ours rings in like a minute.
That has no bells. They have no bells.